and I was going, what is going on? It's getting warm. And right in between my legs, it started a fire. What you're looking at here is Eddie's new old engine. I bet you've never seen one of these before. It's an iron block LM7 5.3 liter straight from the junkyard. Okay, so it's far from an original idea, but the thing is, if a guy or gal wants to go fast for cheap, this is how you do it. So here's what I'm thinking. The plan is to tear this thing down and get the parts cleaned and checked over at a machine shop. The donor vehicle was in a pretty rough accident, so I think it's worth it to have a pro give it a go-ahead. You might notice a white residue on the engine as I'm tearing it down, and that's what's left of the battery. Luckily, my years of hot wing eating challenges have conditioned me not to touch my eyes when I have spicy, corrosive, caustic, radioactive, or otherwise detrimental to eyesight substances on my fingers. So after I have it checked out and cleaned at the machine shop, the plan is to do a simple boost ready bottom end build. Boost ready Eddie, as you might say. I'll be reusing the same rods and pistons to stick with the going fast on a budget aesthetic, since forged rods would require selling my last kidney, and the stronger Gen 4 rods are so hard to come by for a reasonable price that leaves this as really the only option for now. Gen 3 parts will be able to handle what I'm throwing at them given the proper ring gap and tuning arrangement. This little 5.3 that could came with 862 cathedral port heads, so I'll likely stick with those unless I get lucky between now and fire up, since they're essentially the predecessor to the relatively sought after 706 heads, or that's my understanding anyway. I might get a little rowdy and do some gasket match porting, but we'll get there when we get there. A Summit Turbo Cam should go nicely with this combination to eke out just enough to get me where I want to be for now. As far as forced induction goes, I used an eBay T04E on Mutt, the Miata, and it has done just about what I expected so far. I sized Mutt's turbo a bit on the big side on purpose because I wasn't confident in the ability of some of the stock parts to stay together with a smaller turbo. Now, I know that sounds counterintuitive, but with a smaller and frankly more correctly sized turbo, peak torque would have been achieved sooner in the power band while the car is still trying to get moving, and that's what would kill parts. With a slightly oversized turbo, the power builds later in the curve, thus saving the differential. That and a rather ginger tuning profile, of course. So right now, Mutt's running somewhere in the lower left area of the compressor map, and there's a lot of room to grow. So basically what that means is this thing's fun on the highway where you have plenty of room to roam, but off the line it's still kind of Miata-ish. 0 to 60 eventually type thing. But once that boost finally does kick in, hold on. Mutt's setup seems to be a decent compromise where the power really starts to build later in the curve, but at the same time the spool up time is respectable. Keep in mind this really only applies at lower boost levels, and if I were to crank it all the way up it still would probably hurt the transmission or the diff, since they're both still stock. Sounds like a good opportunity for upgrades. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more Turbo Miata content. Now that that tangent's over with, the point I'm trying to make is that inexpensive turbos from eBay or similar can make for great additions to a build. The only thing I would really say if you're going to use one for yours is to keep an eye on the shaft play. The bearing systems in these cheaper turbos seem to be where manufacturers tend to cheap out. but if you're okay doing periodic check-ins, I think they're well worth it. All that being said, I think one or two of them should be sufficient for the first draft of Eddie's build, at least enough to make some passes at the strip. They can always be upgraded down the road. According to the Garrett Turbo map, the GT3076R is capable of about 40 pounds per minute of air at the boost pressure I'd like to run with some room to grow. My math tells me I need about 75 pounds per minute of air for what I'm trying to make, so 2 of these El Cheapos should supply enough to get me to my horsepower and quarter-mile goal without breaking the budget. It'll either be those or a single GT45, and that should be able to supply the 75 to 80 pounds per minute that I need, but I haven't decided on that quite yet. If you're wondering how I came up with those numbers, stay tuned for a turbo math video that will help you size the right turbo for your application. Until then, check out the first draft of the Built Bottom End Performance Horsepower Calculator and give some feedback on what could be added. A link to that will be in the description. When it comes to fitting all this into the engine bay, I'm going to try to be a measure twice, cut once type of noodle thrower. So since I'll be starting from a fresh engine bay with Eddie, I elected to have it all 3D scanned. This means I'll have a digital recreation of his engine bay and engine that will allow me to screw up the mounting and turbo kit virtually before I screw it up in real life. All jokes aside, this is a very powerful thing and I really look forward to finishing out the layout in CAD and then seeing it come to fruition in real life. It should help a lot with the challenging nuances of building a turbo kit, let alone doing all of that as well as a full driveline swap. For those that may say this is overkill, well, I guess I can't disagree, but this technology exists and I'm all about using tools to make a job easier. Since this is going to be a drag car with a motor plate instead of traditional motor mounts, off-the-shelf LS swap kits are essentially useless to me, and even if it was, I'd probably still be doing the same thing. Plus, I just enjoy doing this sort of thing, and that right there is a good enough reason for me. It'll also make for a nice starting point down the road when we go for a full tube front end. What can I say? I just like throwing noodles at the wall to see what sticks. So by now in the video you can see I'm pretty deep into the bottom end of this thing and I'm being careful to mark the caps as I go along, both rod caps and main caps. Every now and then you see me grab a punch out of my kit and I stamp a number into them so that they go back into the same position and orientation they came out. These rods are manufactured in such a way that the big end or crankshaft side is cast intact and then broken off. That is to say the rod and the cap are not manufactured separate but as one part. Then by one means or another the cap is broken off from the rod to create matching sets. You'll have a really bad day if you try to mix and match these. Another cool thing about these LS engines that makes them desirable for high horsepower applications is the skirt and 6-bolt main design. Back in the Gen 1 days, having a 4-bolt main engine was really something. Now these Gen 3 and up engines take it one step further by utilizing the traditional 4-bolt style, but in addition to that, they have a skirt that protrudes from the bottom of the block, and the GM engineers had the bright idea to put another bolt in this extra meat, which in turn enhanced the rigidity of the block and the strength of the cap holding power. Stronger, more rigid block, more support for the crank. In Mutt's 1.6 liter BP engine, for example, the crankshaft is not as well supported and tends to turn into a noodle at high RPMs. It'll be nice not wondering if I'm having pasta for dinner as I beat on this LS. If you want to follow along with Eddie's progress, make sure to tooch the subscribe button and tooch the bell icon to stay up to date with all the new noodle throwing. Also be sure to check out the other social medias, links for which can be found in the description. If you need parts to elevate your endeavors, check out the Built Bottom End Performance stores on the website or on Amazon, links below. That just about does it for this one. Be kind, and remember that not everything is black and white.